So, what is musical composition? I believe that musical composition is the ability to take the same 12 notes and do something truly unique and original with it, even though everybody knows those notes and has access to those notes, but you need to be creative and do something, different than the next guy would. Not necessarily better, but just different. And that's what the best musicians have always done. That's what I try to do. Problems and complications. Music in America or any other capitalist economy is a business. So if somebody takes your ideas to market first, then they get the credit, they get the record deal, they get the tour, they get the money, they get the women. And meanwhile, the progenitor of that style, that melody, that song is still broken, unknown, and working a crummy job to pay for a tiny little apartment. And, and so it's a major injustice, and even if they come back and say, well, and admit, well, we actually ripped off this unknown guy or that nobody's ever heard of, and then try to compensate you financially, it's not really adequate because, they're returning an intellectual property that's been already played out. And it's not like they're going to get all the fans to come out again and listen to the original guy play that same song and then act like they've never heard it before. So, it really is quite the crime. And there's a lot of financial and social pettiness involved. You have to understand that this is people with a high amount of social and financial capital exploiting somebody with a low amount of social and financial capital. And by virtue of the fact that they have a bigger audience than me, they feel like they can kind of take little bits and pieces from me and then pass it off as something original. And it's usually some aging mogul that desperately wants to stay relevant. And, so they rob the underground, and in doing so, they leech my credibility. And, and it might not even necessarily be someone well-established or rich and famous. It might be a fellow independent. Like I heard a story, and I don't know if this is true, but I heard a story about a young pianist who learned how to play my guitar composition called D Vendetta, which ironically is about revenge against the mafia that does this kind of stuff all the time. But learned to play that on piano and then went to another state or another country and played it in some major venue for a lot of people and was paid a decent little chunk of money to do so. And as per the rules of BMI, that guy's supposed to give me twice what he was paid because I'm an unsigned artist. But this is very difficult to prove. If nobody took a video, nobody's willing to talk about it. So, there's that. And then a lot of times, these people, it's like, I don't really like this guy. That's what they say. They don't really like this one, the guy that wrote the song. Maybe they don't agree with his political opinions, or maybe they don't like the way he looks. He's bald and he's ugly. And I'm going to take this guy's ideas and give it to this pretty girl who's politically correct. And we're going to take his song that's about something incendiary, and we're going to make it about puppies. And maybe it'll sell more and blah, 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 blah. Maybe we can do better with his ideas than he can. And, there's that motivation. Or maybe it's just simple greed. These people feel like they need another $1 million or another kilo of heroin or another orgy. And they're willing to take from someone who has never had any of these things. And it's major bullshit, and at this point, I'm 35 and I'm just sick of that crap from the mainstream. And I famously complained about something I heard on satellite radio where they literally took a piece of one of my songs and combined it with a piece of one of my other songs and then tried to pass this off as original. Well, it's not original. They merely heard me and copied, and, and they're biting my style, basically. And, I complained, and then everybody on the internet bagged on me and was like, well, you don't own chords. You don't own that chord. And, that's ridiculous words to put in my mouth. I'm not David Geffen, and I don't think that I own chords. Um, but, you know, like I said, when you put a series of chords together with certain riffs and certain scales and you play it in a certain rhythm, you know, once it's honed to a certain degree, it becomes unique to that artist and it's kind of their property. And to take that and just copy it blatantly and directly, that's not musicianship. And, like, for instance, this chord. That's a major 7th chord. And I'm not claiming that I own that or that I invented it. In fact, the first video that I used it in, I even said, you know, I first heard this from Red Hot Chili Peppers and Foo Fighters, and even Metallica's used that chord. And they did it in a way that was really neoclassical, and you couldn't even tell it was that chord unless you learned how to play the song and noticed that it's the same shape. But my point is that there's a million different ways. If you heard that chord from me or anyone else, and you liked it and you wanted to put it in your music, there's a million ways to do that without ripping me off or without ripping anyone else off, as I've proven over and over and over again by writing a bunch of different songs with that chords. And it's like, how many songs do I have to write with the same chords to prove that, you know, I have musicianship, you know, or at least more musicianship than the people who copy me? Like, for instance, I was jamming just today and trying to replicate something that I heard in my head, and that when you're a musician, you know, you focus on what sounds good to you, and you try not to repeat your mistakes. And it's just like being a comedian. You're workshopping material, and you definitely want to avoid playing the mistakes in front of people and just focus on what sounds good to you. And some people, they have no sense of style, and so they can't, you know, they don't know what sounds good unless somebody tells them that sounds good, and then they go out and copy it. But just sort of earlier today, I was playing around with some chords and not even really trying, and I came up with this, which I think is pretty original. And it goes something like this. And, you know, maybe that's a little bit reminiscent of maybe Dead Kennedys or the Pixies. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's used a major 7th chord in a punk context, but, you know, I think that even just that simple song, and I've yet to embellish it or add on more. There's a whole bunch of stuff, ideas I already have to embellish it and make it even more unique. But, you know, that's a basic idea that just hasn't even been fleshed out. But even then, if I were to publish that and make a lot of money off of it and get women to sleep with me because they're impressed with it, you know, then I would still trace that back to its roots and be like, well, I couldn't have written this without Jello. I couldn't have written this without East Bay Ray. I couldn't have written this without Black Francis. And you know what? I would feel like I owe them a beer or smoke them out or, you know, just hang out with them and be like, I love y'all. Y'all are my idols. You know, which is a lot more than the people who rip me off do for me, I can tell you that. And, you know, that's my point, you know, and the question I ask is, how many songs can you write with the same chords? Well, stay tuned to find out, kids.